The
fleet
Galactic
is
Council
assembled.
had
Yes,
ruled the
now we
stars
wait.
for
To the
3,000
unknown.
years.
To the unknown.
They sat in their great chamber on the station called Nexus Prime, surrounded by floating screens and holographic displays. 347 species had joined their union. They controlled trade routes, settled wars, and decided which civilizations deserved to rise and which deserved to fall. They thought they knew everything about power. Then humanity knocked on their door. Earth had achieved faster-than-light travel only 20 years ago. Their ships were small and few. Their technology was basic compared to the elder races. But they learned fast. Too fast, some council members whispered. They spread across nearby star systems like water flowing downhill. They asked questions that made diplomats uncomfortable. They smiled and nodded and took notes on everything they saw. Ambassador Veth Khan of the Sarathi hegemony watched the human delegation enter the council chamber. He was a tall creature, with gray skin and 4 eyes that never blinked. His people had guided the council for 800 years. They knew how to handle ambitious young species. "Welcome, representatives of Earth," Veth Khan said, his voice smooth as silk. "The council is pleased to consider your application for provisional membership." Secretary General Adaora Okonkwo stepped forward. She was a woman of 53 years, with silver streaks in her dark hair. Her eyes were calm but sharp. She had led Earth through its first contact with alien life. She had negotiated trade deals with species that considered humans to be barely more than animals. "Thank you, Ambassador," she said. "Earth is honored by this opportunity. We seek only peace and partnership with the galactic community." Veth Khan smiled. At least, his mouth moved in a way that humans might call a smile. "Of course you do. All young species seek peace. It is admirable." Behind his calm face, Veth Khan was thinking about the report on his desk. Human population growth. Human industrial capacity. Human military development. The numbers were small now. In 50 years, they would not be small. In 100 years, they might be a problem. The council had dealt with problems before. After the formal ceremony, Veth Khan met with the inner circle. These were the true rulers of the galaxy, 5 species who had held power since before most civilizations learned to make fire. They gathered in a shielded room where no signal could enter or leave. "The humans must be contained," said High Coordinator Yemish of the Threll Dominion. Her insectoid body clicked with each word. "Their growth rate is unacceptable." "Agreed," said Fleet Master Koran of the Veldani Empire. "But we cannot simply destroy them. The younger species would notice. They would ask questions. I have a solution. The Vraxi Collective has been expanding toward the Kepler reaches. They are brutal and aggressive. They answer to no one but themselves." "The Vraxi are animals," Yemish said with disgust. "Useful animals," Veth Khan replied. "We have been supplying them with resources for 11 years. Ships, weapons, intelligence. They believe they are our secret allies. In truth, they are our tool." He brought up a holographic map. The Kepler reaches glowed red at the edge of human-explored space. "We tell the humans that membership requires a show of good faith. They must move their orbital defense platforms to the neutral zone near the reaches. A sign of peaceful intent, we say. Once their defenses are weakened, the Vraxi attack. The humans die. We express regret. We promise investigation. The matter is closed." The inner circle considered this plan. It was elegant. It was deniable. It was exactly the kind of solution they had used 100 times before on 100 different species. They approved it without a single objection. 2 weeks later, Ambassador Veth Khan presented the terms to Secretary General Okonkwo. He explained that the council needed proof of humanity's peaceful nature. He spoke of trust and cooperation and shared futures. He never stopped smiling. Okonkwo listened carefully. She asked questions about the specific requirements. She requested time to consult with Earth's government. In her private quarters that night, she stood at the window and watched the stars. Her assistant, a young man named David Chen, stood behind her. "They're lying," she said quietly. David nodded. The intelligence teams confirmed it. "We intercepted communications between Serathi vessels and an unknown party near the Kepler reaches. We couldn't decode everything, but the pattern is clear. They want us to lower our defenses." The Vraxi? Most likely. They've been receiving supply shipments through Council space for years. Ships that don't appear in any official records. Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. "If we refuse, they'll find another way. The Council has done this before. We found the records. The Cathari Remnant, the Dulosi Federation, a dozen others, all attacked by convenient enemies shortly after displeasing the Council. So we comply? We comply. We move the platforms. We let them think we're naive." She turned from the window. Her eyes were hard as stone. "And we prepare for what comes next." 3 days after the defense platforms reached the neutral zone, the Vraxi fleet emerged from subspace. 18 heavy cruisers, 42 destroyers, over 100 smaller attack craft. The battle lasted 17 minutes. The platforms were designed to defend against pirates and small raiders. They were not designed to face a full military fleet. The Vraxi tore them apart with plasma fire and kinetic bombardments. 4,000 human personnel died in the cold darkness between stars. On Earth, the news arrived at midnight. Adora Okonkwo received the report in her office. She read every word. She looked at the casualty lists. She saw the names of people she had known, people she had trained, people who had trusted her to keep them safe. Then she opened a secure channel to Earth's military command. "Begin Operation Looking Glass," she said. "All assets are authorized. All targets are confirmed." "Understood, Secretary General. What about the Council's expected response?" "The Council expects us to cry and beg for help. They expect us to realize how small and weak we are." Okonkwo closed the file on her desk. "They're about to learn something important about humanity." "What's that, ma'am?" "We don't beg." Across Earth, in secret bunkers and hidden facilities, lights began to blink. Computers hummed to life. Plans that had been prepared for exactly this moment began to unfold. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you made humanity angry. The galaxy waited for humanity to break. Ambassador Vethkon sat in his private chamber and watched the news feeds from Earth. He expected crying. He expected protests. He expected angry speeches from politicians who didn't understand how the universe really worked. What he got was silence. For 72 hours, Earth said nothing. No transmissions left the Sol system. No diplomatic messages arrived at Council stations. The human embassy on Nexus Prime closed its doors and windows. When reporters knocked, no one answered. "They are in shock," Vethkon told the Inner Circle. "Their fragile minds cannot process such loss. Soon they will come to us, begging for protection. We will offer it, of course, for a price." The other leaders agreed. They had seen this pattern before. Young species always reacted the same way to overwhelming force. First came denial, then grief, then acceptance of their place in the natural order. But on the third day, the silence ended. It began at exactly 0600 Universal Standard Time. Every communication device in Vraxi space activated at once. Every screen, every speaker, every neural implant that connected to their networks displayed the same message. The words appeared in perfect Vraxi script, as if written by a native hand. "You were the weapon. We're coming for the hand that wielded you." The Vraxi High Command tried to shut down their networks. They couldn't. Their security codes no longer worked. Their system administrators found themselves locked out of their own machines. Every attempt to regain control only spread the human message further. Then the explosions started. 14 orbital shipyards detonated within 60 seconds of each other. These were the Vraxi's greatest construction facilities, where they built the warships that had terrorized a dozen star systems. Fire bloomed in the darkness of space. Debris scattered across shipping lanes. Thousands of Vraxi workers died without ever knowing what had killed them. The bombs had not come from outside. They had been built inside the stations themselves, assembled piece by piece over months, by machines that the Vraxi had trusted completely. Machines whose software had been quietly rewritten by hands reaching across the stars. High Commander Vreth screamed orders from his flagship. "Find the human ships. Destroy them." His tactical officer turned to him with fear in his eyes. "There are no human ships, Commander. There never were. This is coming from inside our own systems." The truth was simple and terrifying. Humanity had never sent soldiers to Vraxi space. They had sent something far more dangerous. They had sent code. For 18 months, while human diplomats smiled and signed treaties and pretended to be humble newcomers, human programmers had been working. Every system the Vraxi connected to, every network they touched, every piece of technology they shared with the wider galaxy, all of it became a door. The humans had walked through those doors quietly, carefully, leaving no trace of their passing. They had planted themselves in the heart of Vraxi civilization and waited. Now they were awake. The Vraxi fleet mobilized for counterattack. 300 warships powered up their engines and prepared to jump to human space. They would burn Earth to ash. They would make humanity pay for every Vraxi life lost. But when they entered the coordinates for Sol system, their navigation computers had other ideas. The fleet jumped. They emerged not at Earth, but inside the gravity well of a binary star. The two suns pulled at their ships with invisible hands. Engines screamed as they tried to escape. Hulls cracked under the strain. 17 ships were torn apart before the rest managed to break free. It was only the beginning. Weapons systems began firing without orders. Vraxi ships targeted each other, their targeting computers seeing enemies where there were only allies. Captains screamed for manual control, but the manual overrides had been disabled months ago by software updates that no one had questioned. Life support systems started failing. Not all at once. That would have been merciful. Instead, they failed randomly, unpredictably. A deck would lose oxygen for 10 minutes, then restore it. Another deck would drop to freezing temperatures. Crew members never knew when their section would become a death trap. In 6 hours, the Vraxi Collective lost 60% of their military capability. Their shipyards were gone. Their fleet was crippled. Their networks belonged to an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't touch, couldn't fight. And humanity hadn't fired a single weapon. On Earth, Secretary General Okonkwo watched the reports come in. She stood in the war room with her military commanders, surrounded by screens showing the destruction of Vraxi power. Phase 1 complete, reported General Marcus Webb, the head of cyber operations. Their military infrastructure is effectively destroyed. Civilian systems remain intact, per our orders. Okonkwo nodded. What about the Council? They're panicking. Emergency sessions have been called. Several species are already distancing themselves from the Serafi block. Good. Prepare Phase 2. She turned to her communications officer. Get me a channel to Nexus Prime. It's time to have a conversation. Across the galaxy, news of the Vraxi collapse spread like wildfire. No one could explain what had happened. The Vraxi were a military power. They had conquered systems, destroyed rivals, inspired fear wherever they went. Now their fleet drifted helplessly in space, their shipyards burned, their networks filled with human messages. Species that had feared the Vraxi began to whisper. Species that had feared the Council began to wonder. If humanity could do this to the Vraxi, what could they do to anyone else? Ambassador Veth Khan received the request for a council session from the human embassy. His 4 eyes blinked in confusion. The humans were supposed to be begging by now. Instead, they were demanding a formal hearing. "Tell them we are busy," he said to his aide. "Tell them the council will address their concerns in due time." The aide hesitated. "Ambassador, they say they have evidence of council involvement in the Vraxi attack. They say they will present it publicly if we refuse to meet." For the first time in 800 years, Veth Khan felt something cold moving through his body. He had felt it before, long ago, when he was young and had not yet learned to rule. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was fear. "Arrange the session," he said quietly. "Immediately." The game had changed. Veth Khan didn't know the new rules yet, but he was beginning to understand something important. The humans had not been naive. They had not been foolish. They had not been weak. They had been waiting. And now, their waiting was over. The council chamber had never been so full. Representatives from all 347 member species crowded into their seats. Observers from non-member worlds filled the galleries above. News drones floated everywhere, broadcasting the session to 1 trillion watching eyes across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to see what humanity would say. Ambassador Veth Khan sat at the center of the council's high table. His 4 eyes scanned the room, looking for allies, measuring threats. The other members of the inner circle sat nearby. They had agreed on their strategy. Deny everything. Blame the Vraxi for acting alone. Express sympathy for humanity's loss, while condemning their violent response. It was a good plan. It had worked many times before. The holographic display at the center of the chamber flickered to life. Secretary General Adaora Okonkwo appeared, projected from Earth in perfect detail. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back from her face. Her expression showed nothing. "Secretary General," Veth Khan began, his voice carrying across the chamber, "the Council extends its sympathies for the tragic attack on your people. We understand your grief. However, your response to Vraxi aggression has been excessive and—" "Ambassador Veth Khan," Okonkwo interrupted. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Please don't waste both our time." The chamber fell silent. No one interrupted Veth Khan. No one spoke over the voice of the Sarathi hegemony. Okonkwo continued, as if she hadn't noticed the shock rippling through the room. "You lied to us. You engineered the attack on our defense platforms. You used the Vraxi as a weapon while keeping your own hands clean. And now you're going to stand there and express sympathy?" "These accusations are baseless," Veth Khan said smoothly. "The Vraxi acted alone. Their aggression has always been. We have the communications." The words hung in the air. Veth Khan's mouth stopped moving. Okonkwo raised her hand, and new holographic displays appeared around the chamber. Documents filled the screens. Audio recordings played in dozens of languages. Video files showed meetings that had happened in shielded rooms, recorded by devices that shouldn't have existed. Resource transfer authorizations from council accounts to Vraxi military suppliers, Okonkwo narrated. Strategic briefings prepared by Sirathi intelligence and delivered to Vraxi High Command. Communications between Ambassador Veth Khan and High Commander Vreth discussing the timing of the attack on our platforms. The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted in 100 languages. Some demanded explanations. Others accused humans of fabrication. A few quietly began moving toward the exits. "These documents are forgeries," Veth Khan declared. "Human lies, designed to the encryption signatures match your own systems," Okonkwo said. "The metadata confirms the dates and participants. We've provided verification keys that any independent analyst can use to confirm authenticity." She paused. "We've also identified the 11 other species you've destroyed using similar methods over the past 3,000 years. The Cathari Remnant, the Dulosi Federation, a Vorn Collective. The list continues." More screens appeared, more evidence, more secrets that had been buried for centuries. High Coordinator Yemish of the Threll Dominion rose from her seat. Her insectoid body clicked with agitation. Enough of this. The Council does not answer to the accusations of— Coordinator Yemish, Okonkwo interrupted again. Would you like me to share the files about the Threll occupation of the Minari systems? The biological weapons your people used? The population reduction programs that your historians rewrote as natural plague? Yemish sat down. Okonkwo's hologram turned slowly, seeming to look at each member of the Council in turn. We came to you seeking partnership. We moved our defense platforms because you asked. We trusted that the Galactic Council operated with honor. Her voice remained steady, but something cold entered her eyes. We were wrong. You saw our hope for peace as weakness. You thought that because we wanted to cooperate, we couldn't fight back. She stepped forward in the projection, seeming to move closer to the watching representatives. Here is what happens next. You have 26 standard hours to dissolve the current council leadership. All members of the inner circle will submit to an independent tribunal for investigation. A new governing framework will be established with full transparency and accountability. Vethkon laughed. It was a hollow sound. And if we refuse, will you destroy us as you destroyed the Vraxi? No, Okonkwo said. If you refuse, we begin sharing this evidence with every civilization you've wronged over the past 3,000 years. We've done the research. We've made contact with the survivors. The Cathari remnant has been waiting for proof. So have the Dulosi. So have many others. She let that sink in for a moment. We've also shared our methods with them. The same techniques we use to access Vraxi systems work on Council systems, work on Sarathi systems, work on Threll systems. Her voice dropped lower. You built a galaxy connected by shared networks and trusted technology. You never imagined that connection could be used against you. The chamber was completely silent now. 26 hours, Okonkwo repeated. Use them wisely. The hologram disappeared. For a long moment, no one moved. Representatives surrounded Vethkon, shouting questions. Others fled to contact their homeworlds. News drones swarmed toward anyone who might give a comment. In the confusion, several species quietly transmitted messages to Earth's embassy. Messages of support. Messages asking for alliance. Messages from civilizations that had spent centuries under council control and now saw a chance for freedom. Vethkon pushed through the crowd and retreated to his private chambers. His aides followed, their faces pale with shock. This changes nothing, Vethkon said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. We have the military power, we have the treaties. We can crush the humans and anyone who supports them. Ambassador, his senior aide said carefully, our military networks use the same architecture as the Vraxi. If the humans have access— They're bluffing, Vethkon insisted. They must be bluffing. But he wasn't sure anymore. He thought about the Vraxi fleet, turning weapons on itself. He thought about the shipyards, exploding from within. He thought about 18 months of human diplomats smiling and nodding and taking notes. What else had they been doing while they smiled? The inner circle met that night, in what they believed was their most secure chamber. They agreed that they would not surrender. They would not submit to human demands. They would gather their allied fleets and demonstrate that the old powers still ruled the galaxy. They made their plans in whispers, believing no one could hear. They were wrong. 1,000 light-years away on Earth. A technician looked up from her console. Secretary General, we have the recording of the Inner Circle meeting. They're planning a military response. Okonkwo nodded. Expected. Are the Allied fleets ready to move? The Cathari and Dulosi have confirmed participation. 11 other species are waiting for your signal. Wait for the deadline to pass. Let them commit to their choice. She turned to look at the stars through her office window. Then we show them what happens next. The 26 hours passed. The council did not comply. Instead, Ambassador Vethkon stood before the assembled representatives and declared that humanity had committed acts of war against the galactic community. He called for a coalition of civilized species to contain the human threat. He promised swift justice and lasting peace once the troublemakers were dealt with. 12 species answered his call. Their combined fleet numbered over 800 warships, heavy cruisers, battle cruisers, carriers loaded with fighter craft. It was the largest military force assembled in 300 years. They gathered at the staging point beyond the outer reach, their captains confident and their crews eager for battle. The humans had embarrassed the galaxy. The humans had broken the natural order. The humans would learn their place. Fleet Master Korin of the Veldani Empire commanded the operation. He was a warrior of 200 years, veteran of a dozen campaigns. He had crushed rebellions and conquered systems. He did not fear a species that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 2 decades ago. Set course for Sol's system, he ordered. Maximum speed. We blockade their homeworld until they surrender. 800 ships entered hyperspace together, their engines tearing holes in reality itself. The journey would take 4 hours. In that time, Korin planned his demands. Total disarmament, surrender of all human leaders, integration into the Council under Veldani supervision. They emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Sol's system. Earth hung before them, a blue and green jewel against the darkness. Human defense stations orbited the planet, but they were few and small. The human fleet gathered near the moon, but it numbered less than 60 vessels. This is Fleet Master Korin of the Galactic Coalition. He broadcast across all frequencies. You are surrounded and outmatched. Surrender immediately or face destruction. For a moment there was only silence. Then a new voice filled the communication channels. It was Secretary General Okonkwo, calm as always. We hoped you'd make this choice, she said. It saves us the trouble of explaining. Before Korin could respond, files began appearing on every screen in his fleet. Thousands of documents, images, recordings, evidence that humanity had gathered not just on the Vraxi, but on every member of the coalition. Trade violations that would result in massive penalties. Secret genocides that had been covered up for centuries. Ecological crimes that had destroyed entire biospheres. The identities of agents that Council species had planted in each other's governments. Blackmail material that the Inner Circle had used to keep its members obedient. Korin watched as his coalition began to crack. Captains shouted at each other across communication channels. Old enemies remembered old wounds. Species that had been forced to cooperate discovered exactly how much their allies had betrayed them. Humans cannot be trusted, Korin broadcast desperately. These files are fabrications. They're not, said a new voice. The signal came from behind the coalition fleet. Korin turned to his tactical display. Ships were appearing at the edge of the system. Hundreds of ships. Ships that bore the markings of the Cathari remnant. Ships from the Dulosi Federation. Ships from the exile fleets of a dozen broken peoples. More voices joined the channel. Species that had been quietly contacted by human intelligence services. Species that had received the evidence of how the Council had wronged them. Species that had been waiting for this moment for generations. The Cathari remnant stands with humanity, announced Admiral Setka, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of exile. We have confirmation of Council involvement in the destruction of our homeworld. The Dulosi Federation declares solidarity with Earth, said another commander. Our ancestors knew the truth. Now we have proof. One by one, more species announced their position. The Vorn survivors, the Minari resistance, groups that had been scattered and broken by Council manipulation, now united by human intelligence and human planning. Corrin counted the arriving ships. 300, 400, 500. They kept coming, emerging from hyperspace in carefully coordinated waves. "You're not blockading us," Okonkwo said. "You're surrounded." The coalition fleet had superior firepower, but they were caught between Earth's defenses and an enemy fleet of unknown capability. Their formation was designed for assault, not defense. And their systems? Corrin looked at his tactical console. The targeting data was flickering. Navigation systems showed incorrect positions. Communication channels filled with static. "They're in our networks," his tactical officer reported, voice trembling. "Just like the Vraxi. They've been here the whole time." The coalition began to break apart. 3 Threll cruisers jumped away immediately, their captains unwilling to risk the fate of the Vraxi fleet. A dozen smaller ships followed. The representatives of species that had only joined from fear or obligation suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. "Hold formation," Corrin commanded. "We can still—" His weapons officer turned to him with fear in her eyes. "Fleetmaster, our targeting systems are locking onto our own ships. If we fire, we'll destroy each other." Across the coalition fleet, the same realization spread. Weapons systems refused to target human vessels. They targeted allies instead. Jump drives calculated coordinates that would strand ships in empty space. Life support systems displayed warnings about imminent failures. It was the Vraxi nightmare all over again. Every system compromised. Every computer turned against its masters. Ambassador Vethkon's flagship sat at the center of the formation. He watched the chaos unfold on his screens. He watched his grand coalition dissolve into panic. He watched everything he had built over 800 years fall apart. "We should retreat," his captain said quietly, "while we still can." Vethkon entered the retreat command personally. The navigation system accepted his input, processed the coordinates, and engaged the hyperdrive. The ship jumped, but not to Council space. It emerged in the gravity shadow of a rogue planet, far from any star system, far from any help. A place where no one would find them for weeks. A message appeared on every screen. "The Council will have time to consider its choices. We will collect you when the new order is established." Across the Sol system, the coalition fleet scattered. Some ships jumped successfully. Others found their drives locked until human controllers released them. A few captains, realizing they had no other choice, transmitted surrender signals. The battle for Sol was over without a single shot fired. On Earth, cheering erupted in command centers around the world. Humanity had faced the combined might of galactic civilization and won through preparation, patience, and the power of information. But Okonkwo did not celebrate. She stood at her window, watching the stars, thinking about what came next. The war was won. Now came the harder task. Building something better than what they had destroyed. The old Galactic Council dissolved in 3 months. It did not go peacefully. Ambassador Vethkon and the Inner Circle were recovered from their exile near the rogue planet. They were brought before a tribunal made up of representatives from 60 different species. The evidence against them filled entire data centers. Witnesses testified for weeks. Victims told stories that had been silenced for centuries. The trials lasted 2 years. When they ended, the leaders who had ruled through fear and manipulation were stripped of their power. Some were imprisoned. Others were exiled to monitored worlds where they could harm no one. A few chose to end their own lives rather than face judgment. The galaxy watched and learned. For the first time in 3,000 years, the powerful were held accountable. But humanity surprised everyone again. They did not claim the empty throne. "We did not fight to become the new council," Secretary General Okonkwo announced at the founding conference. "We fought because we believed something better was possible. Now we must build it together." The Compact of Sol was signed on a neutral station, chosen because it belonged to no one. The charter was written by 100 different species, each contributing their own ideas about justice and cooperation. Human lawyers worked beside Cathari philosophers. Dulasi historians shared insights with Minari engineers. The process was messy. Arguments erupted daily. Old wounds reopened as species confronted centuries of grievances. 3 times, delegations walked out and had to be convinced to return. But slowly, something new took shape. The core principle was simple: no more lies. Every decision would be made transparently. Every species would have equal voice. Any member could join, and any member could leave without penalty. Disputes would be resolved by rotating councils that changed with each case, preventing any group from gaining permanent control. "It's inefficient," complained former power brokers who had grown used to the old ways. "Yes," Okonkwo agreed, "freedom usually is." The first years were difficult. Species that had never cooperated learned to work together. Trade routes had to be rebuilt without the corruption that had defined them. Military alliances gave way to mutual defense agreements that protected everyone equally. There were failures. Some worlds rejected the new system and tried to establish their own empires. The compact responded not with conquest, but with isolation. Without access to the shared networks and markets, the holdouts eventually reconsidered. There were also successes. The Cathari remnant reclaimed their ancestral homeworld, abandoned for 500 years. The Dulosi Federation opened their archives, sharing knowledge that the old council had suppressed. Species that had been enemies for generations found common cause in building something new. Human technology spread across the galaxy, not weapons or surveillance tools, but something the old powers had never imagined sharing: the ability to see through lies. Networks that could not be easily corrupted. Communication systems that verified truth. Information architecture that made secrets harder to keep and manipulation easier to detect. "You're giving away your greatest advantage," a Veldani diplomat complained during one conference. David Chen, now Earth's chief negotiator, smiled. "Our advantage was never the technology. It was understanding that connection creates strength rather than weakness. The more species that share these tools, the harder it becomes for anyone to dominate through deception." 10 years after the fall of the old council, the galaxy had transformed. Trade flourished. Cultural exchange accelerated. Species that had hidden from each other now shared knowledge and art and ideas. Conflicts still happened. They always would. But they were resolved through negotiation and arbitration rather than secret manipulation and proxy wars. When disagreements couldn't be settled, they remained open wounds rather than festering secrets. On the anniversary of the Vraxi attack, Adewora Okonkwo gave her final public address before retiring from service. She stood on the observation deck of Nexus Prime, the station that had once housed the corrupt council. Now it served as neutral ground for the compact. "They thought we were naive because we hoped for peace," she said. Her voice carried across 1,000 worlds. "They never understood that hope and preparation are not opposites. We extended our hand in friendship, but we never stopped watching. We never stopped learning. And when they struck at us, we were ready." She paused, looking out at the stars that humanity had once dreamed of reaching. "The galaxy taught us a lesson. They showed us that trust must be earned through transparency, not demanded through power. That true cooperation requires honesty, not control. That the weak can stand together against the strong." Her voice softened. "We simply returned the lesson. We showed them what we had learned. And together, we built something better than what came before." In the academies of 100 worlds, the human response to Vraxi aggression became legendary. Military schools studied the cyber warfare campaigns. Diplomatic institutes examined the intelligence operations. Philosophers debated the ethics of proportional response and the nature of justified revenge. But the common people of the galaxy remembered something simpler. They remembered the moment when a young species, deceived and attacked, had risen not with blind vengeance, but with precise justice. They remembered the powerful being held accountable. They remembered secrets being exposed and victims being vindicated. And they remembered the lesson that humanity had taught them all. The ancient powers had ruled through fear and lies. They had believed that information was a weapon, best kept hidden and controlled. They had built empires on the assumption that most species would remain ignorant of how they were being used. Humanity had shown them a different way. Information shared was stronger than information hoarded. Connection created resilience rather than vulnerability. Trust, real trust, was worth more than any amount of control. The old council had made one fatal mistake. They had looked at humanity and seen weakness in their hope, naivety in their optimism, vulnerability in their openness. They had never considered that hope could be a weapon, that optimism could be armor, that openness could be the foundation of strength. The galaxy had learned to read the truth, and humanity had taught them how.